How many of you believe that you have the power, that you have the authority to change your situation? How many of you believe that you have the power and the authority to change your situation? The creativity, if you say something, if you put that vibration into the atmosphere, it will come to pass. If you speak life, it will come to pass. If you speak wholeness, it will come to pass. If you speak truth, it will come to pass. If you speak love, it will come to pass. If you speak life, you have the power. You are a cause in your life. Amen. Much love and appreciation to the choir, MLK Chapel International Gospel Choir. Thank you all for coming tonight. I want you all to please stand and hold hands one with another. Look in the eye of the person standing next to you. Look at him in the eye. Tell them that I see you. No, I really see you. I see you for who you are. There's so much love in you. So much power in you. There is so much potential in you. There's so much grace in you. There's so much abundance in you. And I'm here to remind you that you have come to set it free. And please remind me that I'm here to do the same. So let's do it. Here and now. Together. Give him a hug, a high five, give him something that hurts. Dean Carter, much love and appreciation to you for your amazing opportunity, an excellent opportunity to be a chapel assistant, to work for 4 years at the Martin Luther King Jr. International Chapel, to learn, to grow, and to understand myself a bit better. I would ask that all of you please turn to the letter of 1 John. 1 John chapter 4. 1 John chapter 4, beginning with verse 18. And it reads this way: there is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear. For fear has to do with punishment, and whoever fears has not reached perfection in love. We love because he loved first. Those who say, I love God, and hate their brothers or sisters are liars. For those who do not love a brother or sister whom they have seen cannot love God whom they have not seen. The commandment we have from him is this: those who love God must love their brothers and sisters also. For a few moments, I'd like to speak to you of this thought: antidotes for fear. Antidotes for fear. My brothers and sisters, this summer, I had the amazing opportunity to visit the countries of South Africa and Zimbabwe. I was able to witness firsthand the fertile vineyards of the Fairview Gardens in Cape Town and the storied townships at Soweto. I lived in the bush of Zimbabwe with lions, wildebeest, elephants, and giraffes. It was crazy, but I loved it. I was able to see the bustling and evolving metropolis of Johannesburg and climb the ancient ruins of Zimbabwe and Bulawayo. It was absolutely breathtaking and inspiring. But during my travels, I met a certain professor. His name was Christopher Landberg, and he told me that what you're looking at is certainly beautiful. It's gorgeous, it's amazing, but I would caution you to look a bit harder and see it from my perspective. Everything isn't as innocent and beautiful as you would think. The same cities I looked at with such amazement, Landsberg looked at with unease. Landsberg knew most of black South Africans were dealing with an education crisis. While I was focusing on the affluent area of Sandton and its beautiful architecture, his attention was on the neighboring township of Alexandria, whose people still washed in streams, suffered from cholera, and lived in shacks. While I was impressed by the way South Africa moved forward after the discord of apartheid, he could still see the economic disparities and the social exclusions felt by the lower class and those who experienced HIV and AIDS. It's amazing how both of us can look at the same thing, but have two different opinions. Both of us can look at the same city. I can see peace, but he can see problems. We can look at the same communities. I would focus on historic landmarks, but he would see the margin of poverty. Two people looking at the same thing, but having two different opinions. No opinion was truer than the other, and no point was more valid than the other. Both happen to be true in themselves. This happens all the time in our social landscape. As African Americans, we know that we have made tremendous strides to affirm who we are and establish who we are, but we still see that there are many systematic issues and violence that plagues our communities and threatens the livelihood of our youths. We can look at Barack Obama in the White House and say that our government is more representative of the American population, but we can still see that we have a Congress that finds itself in gridlock and discord. We can look at food and think it's good for us, but also know that it may be bad for our health. We can look at parties during the week knowing that we will have a good time, but if we neglect our coursework, which is the real reason we're in school, it will not be good for us. You may think that money is a good dance. You may think that money is a good dance. But as for me, it may not be that great. There are always instances where we can look at the same thing, but have different opinions. Different opinions are natural. God dwells in our diversity of thought, but sometimes our differences cause division. Sometimes we're not willing to step into someone else's shoes and understand their perspective. It's hard when you know that you know that you know that you know something is true for you, but sometimes you can't consider it to be true for someone else. And this is exactly what's happening in the first letter of John. The same apostle who authored the fourth gospel of the New Testament pens this letter. He's writing to a community that is brought together by Jewish persecution. They were persecuted because they valued the teachings of Jesus. They were brought together because of the same struggle. But even though they were brought together from persecution, the community split because they had differing opinions on who Jesus was. Some said he was the Messiah, some said he was a great prophet. Some said that we are redeemed from sin because of his death, some said that we are not. Theological arguments split the church. And John was a part of this argument himself, claiming that people who believed in Jesus were of God and people who denied his power were not of God. The community was too concerned of questions concerning the nature of Jesus and not practicing the love of Jesus. They were more concerned about the nature of Jesus rather than the message of Jesus. And how many of us allow our own egos and beliefs and theologies to divide our communities and resegregate our churches? How many of us are concerned more about proper and right ways of believing, of serving, of worshiping, rather than embodying the message of Jesus' teachings? Teachings that ask us to love our enemies and pray for those who persecute us. Teachings that teach us to forgive those who may persecute you, even if they know not what they are doing. Teachings that say to turn the other cheek even when someone hurts you. We allow popular politics to determine how we relate to one another. We allow someone's sexual orientation to determine who is accepted or excluded. We allow someone's gender to determine how much they are paid or respected in the workplace. We allow a person's level of education to determine how much they are worth to in society. How are we allowing these things to divide us? But one thing is certain. Opinions are vast as there are people. No person, diocese, convention, or church has a monopoly on truth. Sometimes we have to allow ourselves to devalue others simply because they are different from us. We allow our differences to divide our communities. But be careful, because Jesus said that there are sheep that you know not of. Those who are cast away, God would exalt. Those who we would exclude, God would include. Those who we would count last, God would count first. God does not look for sameness. God looks for oneness. And when you look at the diversity of nature and look at how all creation differs from each other, no tree is the same, no animal is the same, no mountain is the same, but all work as one because they need each other to survive. It's not about assimilation, but it's about cooperation. And one of our biggest problems, Jeremiah Wright believed, that plagued the black community after the civil rights movement was the belief that integration meant assimilation. Integration meant acculturation, not seeing ourselves as equals, to able to bring something to the table. And as a result, we've lost practices of passing down knowledge of our own culture, our music, our arts, our history, because we tried so much to be like those whose culture we were trying to assimilate into. So please don't neglect to recognize the genius of your own tradition, the genius you have in yourself. We're not called to be the same. We are called to be one. And the metaphor of jazz helps us to understand this a bit better. You see, jazz, born out of New Orleans, uses instruments that were not supposed to be played together. You have the trap drum, you have the piano, you have saxophone, you have bass guitar, you have trumpets. All are used in different musical traditions, from classical, gospel, R&B, hip-hop, and rock and roll. However, all instruments are allowed to solo. They're allowed to express their own musical genius. No instrument is better than the other, but they all participate in this democratic style of music. That's why you have the classic sounds of Louis Armstrong, Miles Davis, Dizzy Gillespie, Thelonious Monk. Anybody know what I'm talking about? Billie Holiday, Wynton Marsalis, Ella Fitzgerald. All were able to express the beauty of their tradition without compromising their identity. And for those of us who belong to a particular faith tradition, whether that is Christian or Muslim, Hindu or Sikh, Protestant or Catholic, or even if you come from different cultures, we all have so much that we can learn from each other. But the philosopher in me asks, why does it happen that we allow our differences to divide us? How can a community brought together by a similar struggle separate from each other because of theology? How can we make the mistake of seeing difference as deficient? Well, John and I would simply say that it has to be the fear that we have in our communities. Fear causes us to build up our defenses. If I'm afraid of you, I'll try to suppress who you are, to affirm who I am. Toni Morrison would simply say, some people can't feel tall unless someone else is on their knees. And when we fear a group of people or fear a thing, we do whatever it is in our power to avoid it, to control it, or destroy it. Reason being, because we believe that their presence in our lives will threaten who we are. Fear forces us to believe that we can't fully be who we are if we allow someone else to be who they are. This is the fear that fuels the conflicts between the Israelis and Palestinians. This is the fear that prevents us from supporting sensible immigration laws in this country. This is the fear that sustains the prison industrial complex and the criminal injustice system. Whenever you feel the need to keep someone down just to lift yourself up, you are succumbing to fear. Whenever you feel the need to discredit someone else just to validate who you are, we are succumbing to fear. If we are to be honest with ourselves, many of our churches and our governments and businesses are full of cowards. Folks who can't feel secure in their own skin unless they prove how much better they are than someone else. So what can we do to quell our fear? What are the antidotes to fear that we can use to help us on our journeys and keep our communities intact even when we disagree? Well, the first thing we have to realize is that there is absolutely nothing to fear in the first place. There is nothing to fear. Someone else's shortcomings, practices, or lifestyles is not a reflection of who you are. It's a reflection of themselves. It's a reflection of what they do to become whole. It's not an indictment on who you are. It's a reflection of who they are in their journey and who they see themselves becoming. Allow them to be and be yourself. Allow them to be and be yourself. Allow them to be. Let them live. Let them love. Let them grow. Don't push anything on someone else, but be yourself. The best way to help someone is to be who you truly are, not try to micromanage someone else's life. No one can assure their growth, but them. You cannot assure your growth except for yourself. You know, your life can be the greatest sermon you could ever preach. We can never know what will offer enlightenment for someone else. For us, it may be scripture, but for someone else, it may be music. For someone, it may be charismatic worship. For others, it may be meditation. We can never know, but the best thing we can do is seek enlightenment for ourselves. Find salvation for yourself. Find fulfillment for yourself. Find it for yourself. Don't push it on someone else. Marianne Williams said, "Your playing small does not serve the world. You are meant to shine." Playing small simply means following someone else's rules. It means sacrificing who you are just so someone else can feel comfortable, so that you can save someone else. Let your light shine. Be your best. Do your best. Live your best. Love your best. Let your light shine and others will see your good works. And in doing so, you will unconsciously give others permission to do the same. There is nothing to fear. And the second thing we have to realize, the way we can quell our fear is aligned with the timeless teaching of love. To love one another. People don't have to be the same to love. When you realize there's nothing to fear, we can begin to love. John teaches us perfect love casts out fear. Jesus said, "They will know you are my disciples if you have love." Love unifies, it does not divide. Love causes us to recognize the interconnectedness of our community, that I cannot be what I ought to be unless you are who you ought to be. Love says that we cannot lift our hands to worship a God we have not seen unless we extend our hands to help the brothers and sisters that we see every day. Love means cooperation. Love seeks to understand one another. It seeks to understand how we are similar to each other and how we can strengthen one another. We cannot have union with God's Spirit if we do not have peace with God's people. So love more and fear less. Love is everywhere except for where you're blocking it. Love is everywhere except for where you're blocking it. Community is everywhere except for where you're blocking it. Peace is everywhere except for where we're not allowing it. Destiny is everywhere except for when you're not allowing it. Your 4.0 is everywhere except for when you're not allowing it. Do your best. Love your best. And the best news is that God is everywhere except for when we're not allowing it. So hold to God's hand. Now I'm talking about God's unchanging hand. Hold to God's hand. Because if you grab a hold to God's hand, everything you want, hope, and desire is yours. My grandmother would simply say, I was sinking deep in sin, far from a peaceful shore. Very deeply stayed within, sinking to rise no more. But the master of the sea heard my despair, cried from the waters, lifted me, and now saved him mine. Love lifted me. Love lifted me. When nothing else could help. Love lifted me. Love more, fear less. God bless you.
We invite you to join the Martin Luther King Jr. International Chapel Assistants every Sunday at 5:30 p.m. for services in King Chapel. Gather with us on Thursdays at 5:30 p.m. for Theological Table Talk in the Lucian Tobin Library. Till we gather again, God be with you.